Welcome to Big Papa Rob's podcast Story Rewind with Mandy. I'm Big Papa Rob. Each of our stories are about one of the many missing people out there. We rewind the story of a missing person in hopes that someone will hear their story and can share information to help find them. There is always someone who knows something that can find this missing person. The story we're going to tell you about today is Max DeVries. Mandy, it's been a while since we released a podcast. It's been almost 2 months. We just want to give you guys a quick update on what's been going on since then. We just changed our podcast hosting company and moved over to Spotify so we could cut some of our overhead operating costs since we don't have any income coming in from these podcasts. As most of you know, I have a full-time day job and I have to travel out of town a couple of times since the last podcast, and Mandy was sick for about a week. But we're finally back with a story you may or may not have heard of before. I got to following Yvonne DeVries on TikTok and on Facebook and reading up on Max's story and wanted to help with getting Max's story out there and hopefully bring new attention to his case. Yvonne has been very active on TikTok lately and was trying to get enough followers to be able to go live and tell his story. I reached out to her and asked if I could tell his story, and she graciously allowed me to do so. Mandy, have you heard of Natalie Holloway, the young lady that went missing in Aruba?
Yes, I have.
Did you know Max DeVries went missing a year before Natalie went missing in Aruba? But his story didn't make the headlines or become a household name like Natalie's did. It reminds me of what we talked about in the last podcast with Aaron Fortner's mother. Christina said, "It feels like missing young men are less important than missing young women." And here's another case of a bright young man that went missing under suspicious circumstances. Let's rewind the story of Maximus William DeVries, who went by Max. Max was born in Chicago, Illinois, April 18, 1990, to George and Yvonne DeVries, and grew up in Brighton, Michigan. George was a strategic assistant manager with Dunkin' Donuts, and Yvonne was a stay-at-home mother. Max's little sister, Dominique, was born in 1992. Max excelled in school and was described as a very smart and witty young man. He made friends easily. His father, George, taught him, both Max and Dominique, how to sail their family sailboat. By age 14, Max held the title of charter boat first mate because of his sailing skills. The family loved water and spending time together. In reviewing pictures of Max and Dominique, they seemed to be very close siblings.
Tragedy struck the DeVries family November 10, 2002, when George DeVries has a heart attack and passed away, devastating Yvonne, Max, and Dominic. About 18 months later, Yvonne planned a trip to Aruba for her and the kids to get a much-needed break and to enjoy the water that the family loved so much when George was alive. George's sister went along to help Yvonne with the kids. Max at the time was 14 years old and Dominic was 12 years old. The family arrived at La Cabana All-Suite Beach Resort Thursday, May 6, 2004. On Saturday, May 8, 2004, Max wanted to see if the resort had a pool table, so that evening, Yvonne was walking past the front desk and saw a young man in his 30s get pool balls from the concierge and asked the man if the resort had a pool table, and this man said yes, it was on the second floor. So the next evening, Yvonne and the kids went to the second floor so Max could play pool and found the same man with his father playing pool. We're going to use aliases for these two men. The father we will call John Sr. and the son John Jr. John Sr. adopted John Jr. as a child and gave him his name, making him a junior. These two men have not been publicly named as a suspect in this case, and we want to protect the integrity of this case, and that's why we are using aliases in the story. The men asked Max if he wanted to play pool with John Jr. John Jr. was 36 years old at the time. So as John Jr. is playing pool with 14-year-old Max, John Sr. strikes up a conversation with Yvonne. Yvonne shares that her husband had passed away 18 months prior, and they were honoring his memory and celebrating their family strength by coming to Aruba. John Sr., in turn, tells Yvonne that he too had lost his wife earlier that year and was happy to meet someone else on vacation that could sort of relate to what they were both going through. It's kind of odd, but Max and John Jr. seem to be enjoying each other's company playing pool, even with the difference in their ages. Yvonne had mentioned that she and the kids were going to be parasailing the next day, and John Jr. asked if they could join them, and Yvonne agreed. So on May 10th, John Sr. and John Jr. met the DeVries family at 10 a.m. by the resort pool, and they all went parasailing and had an enjoyable time. Max noticed that the place they went parasailing from also rented jet skis. Rob, it just kind of strikes me as odd in a way that a 36-year-old man would want to share a lot of time or spend time with a 14-year-old. That just seems strange to me.
I agree, and we're going to touch on that a little more further on in the story. But yes, it is odd. And I think at the time, they just was kind of like, oh, it's kind of cool that this young man is taking an interest in Max and everything that Max has gone through. I think she is thinking that this is kind of could be a role model.
Yeah.
The next day, Max and John Jr. went jet skiing that afternoon. John Jr. wasn't as skilled as Max on the water with the jet ski, based on the information I found on this case. But it appears that they drove the jet skis to a sandbar, I believe that was about 3 to 5 miles out from the beach, which is well past the distance they were supposed to go. All went well, and they returned within the 45-minute time frame that was supposed to. That evening, Max and his sister played in the resort pool as their mother sat poolside. John Jr. and his father came out to the pool area, and Max asked John Jr. if he would get in the pool and play with him. Max and John Jr. seemed to be bonding, and John Sr. and Yvonne sat poolside and visited. And he made a strange comment to Yvonne about seeing them from the resort room on the beach before they had even met, and that he had told his son that he wanted to get to know this family. This was odd comment, but at the time, it didn't seem to set off any bells or whistles with Yvonne's radar.
Rob, it to me, it seems odd or strange that John Sr. told Yvonne that he saw them from the window and they were at the beach, and he told his son he wanted to get to know that family. That's just kind of something that seems to be just out of the blue. Why would you just see somebody on a beach and say, hey, I want to get to know that person or those people?
Well, you got to remember, this is a comment that she recalls having, but who knows at the time of the conversation how it was brought up. But after everything goes down, she recalls this and goes, now that I think about it, that was a strange comment to be made.
Oh, okay. So it was kind of after the fact went back and thought about it and was like, hey, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next day, May 12th, at around noon, the DeVries family were enjoying their time at the pool when John Sr. joined them at the pool and asked Yvonne if he could take Max out jet skiing. Yvonne said no at first, but of course, Max overheard this, and being the 14-year-old boy, he began pleading and begging his mother to let him go. She finally relented and allowed him to go. Around 1:45, John Sr. and Max went to the jet ski rental to go for their 45-minute ride.
Yvonne and Dominic stayed at the pool. About an hour later, Yvonne started to worry about Max and John Sr. since they had not shown back up, and she walked over to the rental place to check on them. As she approached, she noticed an employee standing at the water, looking out over the water, and asked him if John and her son had come back. He informed her no, and that he was looking for them. Obviously, Yvonne became very worried, and she ran back to the resort and spoke to the resort manager to get help. The resort assisted in searching for Max and John Sr. They also went to the hotel room of John Jr. and banged on the door, trying to see if he had any information, but no one came to the door. The resort gathered people to send boats out to search for John and Max, and after 3 hours, they still hadn't found Max, John Sr., nor had they located John Jr. Finally, Yvonne saw a boat coming to shore with 2 jet skis in tow with John Sr. on board, but no sign of Max. About that time, suddenly John Jr. shows up out of nowhere. He's on the beach and he approaches Yvonne. She asked him where he had been, and he claims he was sleeping off getting drunk the night before and didn't hear anyone knocking on his door. This seemed very odd that he shows up just as his father is being brought in by boat. When John Sr. got off the boat, Yvonne asked him, "Where is my son?" He stated that Max was still out there and that he had gone to the sandbar and had gotten off the jet skis, and when they got back on, they wouldn't start. They tied the jet skis together. He said he heard a thump and looked, and Max was floating away. She asked did he try to go after him, and he stated no. At this time, Yvonne noticed there were scratches to his neck, hands, and head. I find it strange, Rob, that you take a 14-year-old child out jet skiing and come back without the child and then tell the child's mother that he started floating away. You hear a thump and you see him floating away, but you don't do anything to try and get him.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it's a 14-year-old child. Why would you just stand there and watch this kid just float away in the water and not try to do something?
And this is supposed to be the responsible adult taking him out. But here soon, a little further in the story, his story changes a couple of times as he gets official.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But we'll get there in a few minutes.
Okay.
The Aruban authorities immediately took all of them to the police station. Yvonne asked the authorities to do a DNA sample of John Sr.'s fingernails and a polygraph. She even offered to pay to have this done, but they told her no, this isn't America. The Aruban authorities launched the largest search and rescue that they had ever done at that time, searching for Max.
As part of their investigation, it was found that Sunshine Water Sports, that's the rental company of the jet skis, was an illegal operation and that they were not checking IDs per the laws that govern them. No one under the age of 16 was supposed to be permitted to operate a water ski by themselves. If they had been following the law, this tragedy may never have happened. Yvonne, her daughter and sister-in-law, as well as John Sr. and John Jr., were ordered to stay on in Aruba while they conducted the search for Max. Now, on Saturday, May 15th, 2004, Yvonne was contacted by the Aruban authorities at her hotel room, and they told her what no mother wanted to hear. They were calling off the search and that they had done everything they could and that this was just a tragic jet ski accident and that Max was lost at sea. So authorities or anybody else except for Max's family thought that it was odd that John Sr. had said that Max was floating away. They didn't find that odd, and then they just said it was a tragic jet skiing accident.
Apparently, the Aruban authorities really did not do much to this case. You're going to hear more on that as we go into it. But I've seen some of the information say that they even allowed John to go get a shower before he went to the police station.
Huh. Really?
And that, so I mean, they really didn't. I think all they wanted to do was to shut this thing down and not let media get a hold of it.
It's just like a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. A lot of questions here. On May 18th, the DeVries were at the airport to fly back home. Apparently, John Sr. and John Jr. were also flying home the same day, and John Sr. came up to Yvonne and asked, can he send her flowers on Max's anniversary? Rob, is that a strange question? Is that not the bizarrest thing in the world that I've heard, or is that just me?
No, when I saw that and heard that on the information, I'm like, what nerve? I mean, I can't believe that she didn't just turn around and waylay him, because at that time, she thinks he's done something to her son. I mean, he has scratches all over him, and he didn't address that to her. Now, you'll see where he addresses it later in a couple of interviews that we talk about further in the story.
So they're leaving days after this happened, and he wants to send her flowers on her son's anniversary. So he's talking about like a year later, can I send flowers for him for his... that doesn't even make sense to me.
I agree. But it doesn't say anywhere in the information, but with him being at the airport at the same time, I wonder if they actually had to fly on the same airplane.
Wonder if they were going to the same place.
I mean, I don't know how the flights come out of Aruba, if there's multiple flights to different areas of the United States, or if there's one flight that gets you somewhere into the United States and then you branch out from there. But could you imagine being on the airplane with this man?
No, I couldn't. I really couldn't. We didn't see anything that stated that they flew back on the same plane or anything, but could you imagine having to be on the same plane with the man that you assume either hurt your son or at least was the responsible adult that allowed your child to be lost at sea? This was the last time that Yvonne saw either John Sr. or John Jr. Yvonne felt devastated, not only losing her husband, but now one of her children. She struggled with knowing what to do next. So she started looking for help and trying to investigate her son's case. So in the summer of 2005, she finally was able to convince Detective Corey Williams to investigate Max's case. As Williams was able to obtain police report statements from the Aruban authorities, he quickly noticed inconsistencies in the statements. Now we're going to get into it. We're going to get more information about exactly what may have been going on.
Yep.
Now remember what Yvonne said that John Sr. told her when he got off the boat. These two are excerpts from the official statements given to the Aruban authorities. Statement 1. Pay close attention. John Sr. stated the following. They went to get back on the jet skis and they wouldn't start. They tied them together and was going to wait for help. About an hour waiting, we decided to float on the water while holding the wave runners with the rope. At a given moment, Max started swimming toward the shore. We had not agreed anything with each other. He started swimming and I stayed back with the wave runners. At a given moment, I looked in his direction and saw that he was drifting away in the direction of the big hotels. He was no longer swimming. He was drifting by means of this life jacket. I tried to swim to him, but I couldn't. Now, this is the statement, the official statement that was given by John Sr. to the Aruban authorities. And there's just some strange wording in here, just phrases, things he said, Rob, it sounds odd, like we had not agreed anything with each other. Just some of what was said is just strange to me.
Now, this is a written transcript, Now, part of that could be the Aruban authorities when they're writing it out.
Yeah,
because
true. That's
of the language. Not sure, but something we didn't talk about is John Sr., I believe, is a lawyer out of Chicago, which I didn't put in here. But if that is truly how he phrased things, it's kind of concerning on his language. So I kind of chuck it up to maybe how the Aruban authorities translated it.
Okay, so then 3 days later, here's statement 2, also from John Sr. Max and I were on our wave runners waiting. Max and I were on my wave runner. Max in the water hanging onto my wave runner, but we drifted further west from the shore instead of going forward. After this, it almost became difficult to remain seated on the wave runners each time the wave runner would topple over and we would land in the water. After trying to climb onto the wave runners for approximately 45 minutes, I saw Max sitting on his capsized wave runner. I was still in the water. I tried to climb between the wave runners. That was where I got most of the scrapes during my trying to climb onto the wave runner. I got very tired and still could not climb. At that moment, I noticed that Max was no longer sitting on his wave runner, but I could not see him any longer either. I went around the wave runners to find him and saw that Max had let go of his wave runner. I called out to him, but he did not answer. Okay, so now at some point, John Sr. says that he sees Max, and now he goes on to say the following as well. I saw that Max's eyes were open and that he moved now and then, but he did nothing and remained floating very calmly. I could also see that his head was high above the water. When I noticed that Max and I were drifting further apart, I tried to swim to him, but I could not. It became very difficult for me to breathe while swimming with all those waves. So I decided to stop swimming and to float in order not to create any problems, in which case Max would have to help me. After drifting calmly for about 20 minutes, I lost sight of Max. When I saw Max for the last time, he was floating very calmly, moved now and then, but did not try to swim. We did not have any eye contact, and we had not said anything to each other. He was approximately 75 meters away from me. It seemed as he was drifting northwest. I continued drifting west. I could see La Cabana straight in front of me in easterly direction. So, Rob, here again, the statement obviously differs quite a bit from the first statement, but the wording, again, it's strange and odd. It's just bizarre sounding to me. The way that it's I don't want to say worded, because it's supposed to be his official statement, but it's just the language that she used, the wording that she used is just very strange.
Yeah, and where I got this information was a video that actually showed the written statement out. And so I tried to take it word for word off of the video that showed this statement.
Oh, okay.
I saw that on the Never Seen Again season 2. It's a 2-part special on the Paramount Channel.
Okay. If you notice, the first statement says Max was trying to swim towards shore. The second one, there was no mention that Max tried to swim towards shore. Then he started to explain about how the cuts and scrapes in the second story to cover what was seen by Yvonne. If you recall what he told Yvonne when he first came ashore, that story didn't align with either of the two statements. When you lie, it's hard to remember what you said, so your stories are never the same twice. And according to Detective Williams, it didn't appear that the Aruban authorities did any background checks and only took the word of John Sr. and Jr. Williams ran a background check and found that in 1981, John Sr. had been arrested in Los Angeles for crimes against children. The child in this case was none other than John Jr. but it was not clear if this occurred before or after John Sr. adopted John Jr. At the time of this crime, do you want to guess how old John Jr. was? That's right, he's age 14, the same age as Max. These were big red flags for Detective Williams. Why were these two traveling together? Had John Jr. been groomed to help lure young boys for John Sr.? Oh, and by the way, remember when John Sr. told Yvonne that his wife had passed away too? Come to find out, he had never even been married. Detective Williams stated in an interview that he believes that Max was lured to go out and was molested and murdered, and that the scratches that John Sr. had was more likely from Max fighting for his life as John Sr. drowned Max. At this point, Williams reached out to a friend that worked in the FBI to see if they would open a case. They found that there is a federal law that crimes committed by Americans abroad did fall under FBI jurisdiction, and an investigation case was opened. The FBI interviewed John Jr. first, and he denied having anything to do with Max's disappearance. He agreed to do a polygraph test the next day, but wouldn't you know it, he did not show up for the polygraph. A few weeks after the FBI taking on the case, the agent was pulled off the case to work terrorism. To this day, the case appears to be sitting on the shelf as a cold case. As of April 2016, Yvonne gets a message from a woman asking to speak with her. She told her that she dated the younger of the two men for about a year after Max's disappearance. She stated she had a conversation with John Sr. and stated that John Jr. asked her if John Jr. had told her about Max, the boy that went missing in Aruba. She told him no, and he went on to say that John Jr. had been very close to Max when he disappeared. She went on to tell Yvonne that later that night when John Jr. returned home, she asked him about Max. This started a very heated argument, and John Jr. said to never mention his name again. After this argument, she was afraid to ever bring this up. This woman also stated that John Sr. started to get close to her son, and she started noticing odd things like wanting her 10-year-old son to sit in his lap. After she broke things off with John Jr., she looked up information about Max and wanted to reach out to help Yvonne. John Jr. started dating another girl. Yvonne did some research and found this second woman later on, and this woman told her that John Jr. at one point told her that the only thing his father had ever done for him was get him out of some trouble in Aruba. What an odd statement. What did John Sr. do to get John Jr. out of trouble? Did John Jr. have something to do with Max's disappearance? Maybe this is why the hotel manager couldn't get his attention when they went to his room and that he wasn't passed out. Maybe he was already at the sandbar waiting for his dad and Max to arrive. So this same woman, the second ex-girlfriend, went on to tell Yvonne that one night John Jr. was asleep and he started saying Max's name. When he woke up later, she asked him who was Max. This led to John Jr. losing his mind, and he held her at gunpoint, strangled her with the cord, and cut her. She finally escaped when he passed out later that night. He was arrested. Detective Williams was hoping that with this case, they could get some answers about Max's case. But this case fell apart, and there was never leverage to get any answers in Max's case. As of today, this is where this case stands. Yvonne and Dominique still have no justice for Max. Yvonne has worked very hard through social media to get Max's case out to the masses in hopes that it will put pressure on the FBI to reopen Max's case. John Jr. and John Sr. still go about their lives as if nothing ever happened. Maybe they didn't have anything directly to do with Max's disappearance that day, but the inconsistencies in John Sr.'s stories and the actions of John Jr. as it relates to both ex-girlfriends really makes them look guilty. As we wrap up this episode, we also must mention the poor job that Aruban authorities did with handling this case. They obviously did not do any type of background check on the John Sr. or John Jr., or they would have found the arrest of John Sr. as it related to crimes against children. It seems that all they wanted to do was make this case just go away, and it seems to all of us they wanted to do was protect their tourism industry.
Yvonne's social media accounts can be found in my show notes. I have also linked Max to the Millions webpage as well, but as of the time of this podcast, the webpage doesn't seem to be kept up to date. You can help Yvonne by going to her social media accounts on Facebook and TikTok and help share Max's story. Her main goal right now is to get enough attention to Max's case that the FBI reopens the case and brings justice to Max. If anyone listening has any connections, friend of friends, who has connections to the FBI, please share Max's story with them. If our true crime community comes together and keeps pushing Max's story out there, hopefully it will bring enough attention that the FBI has to take notice and reopen Max's case. As you know, missing person cases are very important to Mandy and me. You already know that Layla Santinello was the first case I covered in a podcast. But there are scammers out there on social media that prey on families of missing persons, which makes it difficult for families to be trusting of people like myself who want to help by telling the story of a missing person. With that being said, we struggle bringing some of the stories about missing to life without the input from the families. We are still going to tell the stories of missing, even if it's the missing minutes I've been doing through my social medias, but the podcast may have gaps from podcast to podcast as we try to get information to tell the story of each missing person. If you have a family member that has gone missing and want us to tell their story, please reach out to us. We have a link to our social medias and email in the show notes, and you can find it on all of our social medias. We're looking at starting a second podcast telling true crime stories. This will be an open-ended platform for us because we've had families of unalived family members that have reached out to us to tell stories, but we've had to politely turn it down because it didn't fall within the missing person platform that we currently do. We hope that by doing this second podcast, we can tell these stories and help get information about family members' cases out there to help find justice for them. Also, Mandy and myself have been a long-time follower of true crime, and we will tell some of our favorite stories that you may have heard of from some point, and we hope that we tell you something that you may never have heard of. So stay tuned and follow all of our social media platforms for more information. We may even have a poll coming up where you can help us name our new podcast. The stories we tell about the missing, I hope, arms you with new information about this missing person that might lead to finding them. Additionally, we hope that you will share the information about this person in hopes that by sharing, it may lead to locating this person. As with almost all missing person cases, there is someone out there that knows something. Please come forward and contact the authorities. Once again, I'm Big Papa Rob, and this was an independent podcast called Big Papa Rob Podcast Story Rewind. Our podcast is written and produced by Big Papa Rob. Story editing is done by Mandy. I couldn't have done this without the support of my wonderful wife, Mandy, aka Big Mama. If you want to support our podcast, you can buy us a cup of coffee. You can find the link in our show notes or go to our new webpage, BigPapaRobPodcast.com, and find it on our support page. Speaking of support, we now have an affiliate link on our support page. The company I buy my top hats from has allowed us to be an affiliate. If you click the link and make a purchase from my link, we will make a portion of that purchase, which turn helps us support the operating costs that bring you this podcast. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and tell others about my podcast. And finally, if you have a story idea, please contact me through our website, social media, or email. A link to our website is listed in the show notes. I would love to hear from you. Today's music was The Shield by Hot Dope from Pixabay. This was a Big Papa Rob Podcast 2024. See the show notes for links to the reference material used in this podcast.